right, everyone, get ready because today we are diving into the science behind female attraction. Whether you're getting ready for a date tonight or trying to understand your partner a bit better or just curious about the whole thing, I think you're going to find this deep dive super fascinating.
Absolutely. And we're going to be taking a look at a YouTube video by Gaurav Thakur that asks a really interesting question. Why are women attracted to men who maybe aren't conventionally considered good-looking? The video is in Hindi, but don't worry, we've got you covered with the translation, and we're going to break down all those juicy insights.
That's right. And it's not just pop psychology either. We're going to be going all the way back to evolution, looking at the psychology and even a little bit of neurology, really getting deep into how attraction works.
Yeah, to really understand what's going on today, I think it helps to go way back millions of years ago to our primate ancestors.
Okay, so picture this dense jungles, fierce predators, and you're a female ape just trying to make it out there alive and, keep the species going.
Yeah. Exactly. Back then, choosing a mate was pretty simple.
Hmm.
You just had to find the biggest, strongest male.
Yeah.
The one who could protect you and your offspring.
Basically survival of the fittest, right?
Exactly. But then something really interesting happened. Our ancestors started walking upright, and their brains got bigger.
Which, is good for inventing the wheel and all that, but not so great when it comes to giving birth, right?
Yeah, exactly. Human babies are born with much less developed brains compared to other primates. If they were any bigger, they just wouldn't be able to fit through the birth canal.
Oh, wow. So that changes things up a lot.
Absolutely. And that means mom needs a partner who's not just strong, but also someone who's going to stick around and help raise this tiny human who needs a lot of care for years. Talk about a game changer.
Huge game changer.
Yeah, this is where those high-value traits we hear so much about really come into play.
High-value traits? What does that even mean?
So in this context, we're talking about qualities that would have shown a man's ability to provide and protect back in that ancient environment. Things like ambition, courage, resourcefulness, and even things like kindness and emotional maturity.
So basically the kind of guy who would bring home the prehistoric bacon and be a good dad?
Exactly. And here's the fascinating thing. Even though we've evolved way past those prehistoric challenges, the female brain is still influenced by those ancient pressures when it comes to attraction.
So you're saying even in the 21st century, women are subconsciously looking for a partner who could survive a saber-toothed tiger attack?
Well, not literally, of course.
Yeah.
But those instincts are still there. Women are naturally drawn to men who exhibit those same traits, even if they show up differently in a modern context.
Okay, so let's say you're a woman and you see a guy you find attractive. What's happening in your brain compared to what's happening in a man's brain?
Well, for men, it's often a much faster, more visual process. There's a part of the brain called the amygdala that processes emotions. And in men, this area just lights up when they see an attractive woman.
So it's kind of like seeing a delicious piece of cake when you're hungry. You just want it.
That's a great analogy. It's almost instinctual. But for women, the amygdala isn't as strongly activated by looks alone. There's a lot more going on in their brains, almost like they're gathering information and assessing the situation.
Really? So they're not just going on instinct like the guys?
Right. Their brains are focusing on things like the man's behavior, his confidence, his social cues. They're looking for signs of those high-value traits we talked about, which, as you can imagine, takes a bit more time and conscious effort than just registering, hey, this guy's hot.
That's so interesting. It's like they're running a background check before they even say hello. But doesn't that make it harder for women to develop those strong, passionate feelings?
Not necessarily. Remember those emotional centers in the brain we talked about? For women, those areas can definitely light up, but usually it takes a bit more time and interaction.
So it's not as simple as love at first sight?
Right? For many women, attraction unfolds more gradually. It's about observing a man's character, seeing those high-value traits in action, and developing a sense of trust and connection over time.
That makes a lot of sense, but let's go back to that YouTube video for a second. Gaurav Thakur talks about how women can be attracted to men who aren't conventionally attractive. How does that fit in with this whole evolutionary perspective?
That's where things get really interesting. Remember, we're not just talking about physical attractiveness here. We're talking about a much broader spectrum of qualities that signal a man's potential as a partner.
Okay, so those high-value traits might outweigh a lack of conventional good looks.
Exactly. Think about it. A man who's incredibly witty, intelligent, and driven might not have chiseled features. But those qualities can be incredibly attractive to a woman because they signal something deeper. His ability to succeed to navigate social situations to provide for a family.
So those qualities are basically like the modern-day equivalent of bringing home a mammoth carcass.
Exactly. And remember, those initial assessments women make aren't always set in stone. A man who might seem unattractive at first glance can become incredibly appealing as a woman gets to know him better and sees his character shine through.
It's like that saying, beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
That's a good way to put it. And, it's not just about what a man looks like or even what he says. It's about how he carries himself, how he interacts with the world.
You mean things like confidence and charisma?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Those qualities are often seen as indicators of social dominance, which, evolutionarily speaking, was a very desirable trait in a mate. A man who exudes confidence is likely to be successful in his endeavors, which translates to resources and security for his partner and offspring.
Okay, I'm starting to see the connection here, but I have to admit, I'm a little skeptical. I mean, are you saying that attraction is completely hardwired in our brains? What about free will? What about personal preferences?
Well, it's definitely not that simple. While our evolutionary history has undoubtedly shaped the way our brains process attraction, we're not robots controlled by our instincts.
So how do we reconcile those primal urges with the fact that we all have different tastes and preferences when it comes to partners?
That's where the psychological and social factors come in. Think about it. We're constantly bombarded with messages about what's considered attractive in our culture.
Mm.
Movies, magazines, social media, they all influence our perceptions of beauty and desirability.
So it's kind of like a nature versus nurture debate.
In a way, yes, our brains are wired to seek out certain traits. But those preferences can be influenced by the environment we grew up in and the cultural norms we're exposed to.
That makes a lot of sense. So while we might be drawn to certain qualities on a subconscious level, our conscious minds can override those impulses based on our individual experiences and preferences.
Exactly. And remember, attraction is a dynamic process, not a static one. Our perceptions of someone can change dramatically based on context, shared experiences, and how that person makes us feel.
You mean like that guy who seems totally average at a party, but then you see him confidently giving a presentation at work, and suddenly he's irresistible.
Precisely, context can completely change our perception of someone. It's about seeing those high-value traits in action, seeing how a person handles themselves in different situations, and how they make us feel in their presence.
I've definitely experienced that. It's amazing how someone you might not even notice at first can suddenly become incredibly attractive once you see them in a different light.
Exactly. And this brings us back to Gaurav Thakur's video. He argues that women are particularly sensitive to a man's context and how it reveals his character. A man who might not fit the conventional standards of beauty can become incredibly appealing if he demonstrates those qualities women subconsciously crave.
Hmm.
Strength, competence, kindness, a sense of humor.
So it's not just about looks, it's about the whole package.
Absolutely. And, there's something else that's really important when it comes to female attraction, something Gaurav emphasizes in his video.
Okay, I'm all ears. What is it?
It's the emotional connection. While women might initially assess a man based on those high-value traits, what ultimately seals the deal is how he makes them feel.
So you're saying that logic and rational assessments can only take you so far. Eventually, it comes down to emotions.
Exactly.
So we've talked about logic, we talked about evolution, but now we're getting to the heart of it all, emotions. This is where things can get kind of messy, right?
That's right. We've talked about how the female brain processes attraction a little differently, taking in more information, assessing those high-value traits. But what's really fascinating is what happens as a woman begins to feel a deeper connection with a man.
You mean like when those initial assessments start to become actual feelings? Is it like a switch flips in the brain?
It's more like a gradual shift as a woman spends time with a man and sees him demonstrating those qualities she finds attractive, like kindness, strength, ambition. Those emotional centers in the brain we talked about, they start to become more active.
So it's not just about recognizing those traits, it's about experiencing them firsthand.
Exactly, and here's where it gets even more interesting. Remember how we talked about the prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain responsible for rational decision-making? Well, as those emotional centers become more engaged, the prefrontal cortex can actually become less dominant.
So basically, her logical brain starts to take a back seat to her feeling.
In a way, yes, and this is where that whole love is blind phenomenon comes into play. A woman might start overlooking red flags or rationalizing bad behavior, all because her emotional brain is now in the driver's seat.
So in a sense, this heightened emotional state could actually make her more vulnerable.
Unfortunately, yes. It's why heartbreak can be so devastating. She's invested not just her emotions, but also her rational assessment of this person into the relationship. When it doesn't work out, it can feel like a betrayal of her own judgment.
That's such a good point. I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling of how could I have been so blind? But going back to Gaurav Thakur's video, he uses a great example of a woman who keeps going back to a guy even after multiple breakups. Logically, it doesn't make sense, but emotionally, it makes perfect sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It really highlights just how powerful those emotional components of attraction can be. And it underscores why understanding this is so important. If we're aware of how our brains are wired, we can make more conscious choices in our relationships.
So it's not about suppressing our emotions, but rather being aware of them and how they might be influencing our perceptions.
Exactly. And, thinking about that woman in the video, her situation also brings up another interesting point that Gaurav makes. He says that while men are often drawn to what they see, women are more drawn to what they feel.
Okay, that's a really interesting distinction. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure, think about it. For a man, that initial spark of attraction is often ignited by a woman's physical appearance. But for a woman, that spark often comes from how a man makes her feel. Does he make her feel safe, respected, desired, understood? These feelings are so powerful, and they often outweigh just the superficial attraction.
So you're saying that for a woman, the emotional connection is really the foundation of lasting attraction?
That's a great way to put it, and it goes back to those high-value traits we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Those qualities like kindness, strength, emotional maturity, they aren't just abstract concepts. They translate into actual feelings for a woman. They make her feel safe, secure, cherished. And that's what ultimately creates a really powerful, lasting bond.
That is so insightful. So to sum it all up, it seems like attraction is this really complex mix of evolutionary biology, psychology, and good old-fashioned emotions.
Absolutely. And while men and women might process attraction a bit differently, ultimately, we're all looking for the same thing, connection. We just go about finding it in different ways.
Well, I don't know about you, but this deep dive has given me a lot to think about. It's like I've been given this whole new way of looking at attraction and relationships. What about you? Any final thoughts for our listeners out there?
I think the biggest takeaway here is that knowledge is power. The more we understand about how attraction works, the more empowered we are to make conscious choices in our relationships. We can learn to recognize those high-value traits, prioritize emotional connection, and ultimately find partners who are truly compatible with us both physically and emotionally.
That's great advice. So, listeners, the next time you find yourself attracted to someone, take a moment to think about it. What is it about that person that really draws you in? Is it just a superficial attraction, or is there something deeper, something that speaks to you on an emotional level? By understanding the science behind attraction and listening to your own intuition, you can navigate the dating world with more confidence, clarity, and hopefully a lot more happiness. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.